Future Enchaunter here with a small PSA about this video you're about to watch. This review was ordered last weekend on the 1st of February to be uploaded on the following Saturday, the 7th. Now, if you follow JRPG news, you're gonna be aware by now that Kyoto Xanadu has just received a trailer on the Thursday in between those two dates, which on one hand is awesome, I really wanna play it, but on the other, I spent some time complaining about how Nihon Falcom hasn't released a single game outside the Trails and Ease series in about 10 years, so yeah. My complaint got addressed before I even got to make it. Yay! I wonder if I can get the Elder Scrolls 6 to release by making a Skyrim video. Though to be fair, by this point I'm not even sure I want to. Anyway, just keep this in mind as you watch the review and I hope you enjoy it. Now, back to you, last week's Enchaunter. The Legend of Nayuta Boundless Trails is a weird game to talk about in 2026. Not due to its age, but rather because it represents Nihon Falcom's last release on the original Sony PSP, with all of its many limitations, and also, bearing 2015's Kyoto Xanadu, the last time they released a game that wasn't part of the East or Trails franchises. From a writer's point of view, there's some precious freedom in starting a new one-off story. The knowledge that you don't have to worry about maintaining continuity, setting things up for a sequel, or preserving fan-favorite characters so they can show up again in a future installment, for example. And I feel like Falcom has largely abandoned that freedom in favor of the financial safety of pumping out more entries in a successful franchise. Don't get me wrong, these franchises are successful for a reason, but I just wish they tried something different once in a while. And so, learning of the existence of Boundless Trails and the fact that it's a standalone story with no relation to any other Falcom franchises, despite what the name might suggest, immediately sent my expectations into overdrive, as it represents 2012 Falcom, fresh off of the Rosbell duology and all of its insanity, free to unleash that brand of insanity upon the world and unbound by the need to respect previously established lore or to leave enough room for a sequel. I'm happy to say my expectations were more than satisfied, especially in terms of the game's setting and story, though it greatly suffers from a baffling decision to restrict some quests and characters to a New Game Plus mode for no apparent reason other than padding out the game's runtime. In these terms, I can confidently say Nayuta is a great 20-hour action RPG stretched over a 50-hour slog, and how much you enjoy it will greatly depend on either having the sense to stop the first time you reach the end credits, or the stamina to do it all over again on nightmare difficulty as soon as the credits are over. As always, before we move on to the game itself, I'd like to quickly go through the technical aspects, highlighting some of the features, bugs, and personal pet peeves I've encountered while playing it. For people deep into PC gaming and Nihon Falcom ports in general, all you need to hear is that Legend of Nayuta's PC port was handled by PH3 who, as usual, did a stellar job. The game doesn't provide much in terms of quality options, but as a former PSP exclusive, you're unlikely to need them anyway. Other than that, it has many of the features I love. Native Ultrawide support, fully rebindable ease, and the ability to choose which controller symbols it displays in-game, including all the big industry players and even a couple dead platforms, may both of them rest in peace. There's also a very welcome speed toggle, which I'm not ashamed to admit solves some significant use in my playthrough, and a toggle between the original PSP's lower resolution textures and the upscaled textures added in the remake. All in all, pretty good. The game is locked at 60 FPS, which you would argue is maybe too low for modern standards, but considering the age of the engine and the prevailing 30 FPS is plenty attitude of the time, I don't think that's a problem. I did run into one of my biggest pet peeves in the way the game handles alt-tabbing. Nayuta is another of these games that stops responding when running in the background, so I had to pull out my favorite modding toolset to solve that, but as it often happens with modding, I ran into compatibility issues, this time with Legend of Nayuta's MSAA options, forcing me to turn it off. Thankfully, the PC version's sheer increase in resolution from the original PSP's 480 by 272 means the lack of anti-aliasing was barely perceptible, so it didn't really matter, but I wish more developers caught on to the idea that in this age of multiple monitors, having the ability to keep playing a game with your controller even as you temporarily shift your focus to another window is very helpful, especially one that expects me to play through it twice over. Other than that, the game was very stable and bug-free as far as I can tell, and I didn't feel any performance issues at any point during my playthrough. In terms of story and world building, The Legend of Nayuta borrows heavily from the real-life Age of Discovery, with a little bit of H.P. Lovecraft thrown in for good measure. In this setting, there's a literal edge to the world that no one's ever been able to cross, leading people to believe that the entire planet is flat. Nayuta's parents were scholars who left him and his older sister behind to take part in an expedition looking to disprove that belief and never came back, leading Nayuta to also take the path of a scholar to follow in his parents' footsteps and complete their work. Adding to this world's mysteries is Nayuta's hometown, Remnant Isle, a remote tropical island where meteor showers can be seen all year long and often bring sold-out star fragments along with them. Small crystals that, when lit up by a special machine, project beautiful images of otherworldly vistas believed to be Lost Heaven, a legendary place supposedly located beyond the edge of the world, highly prized by collectors and scholars. The story opens with Nayuta and his childhood friend Signa returning home for a small vacation. Everything starts off as you would expect as they settle down and meet old friends and acquaintances, but this peaceful retreat is soon disrupted by a literal goddamn tower falling from the sky into the beach right outside of town. As the pair reach the top of that tower, they notice a small fairy lying unconscious on the floor and rush to help her. A bunch of stuff happens, but long story short, that fairy's name is Noi and she's in charge of taking care of the Star Garden in Terra, which Nayuta and Signa recognize as a place they saw on a star fragment, confirming that this is, in fact, the lost heaven Nayuta's parents lost their lives trying to find. This garden is home to Reha, the last surviving Mythos people who has spent the last however many centuries in a deep slumber inside a very often-shaped bed set on a remarkably altar-like structure. Noi accidentally brought the tower to Nayuta's world while trying to run away from Zest and his bodyguard Selan, who wanted her Master Gear, a powerful artifact which, if misused, presented grave consequences for Terra. Since Zest chased her into Nayuta's world and took the Master Gear from her anyway, our heroes join Noi in her mission to stop Zest's plans, and in doing so, they uncover the forgotten history of the Mythos people, the world of Terra, and their shared past. By the way, Noi can't just open up portals in the middle of thin air like Zest. Instead, she has to rely on activating previously built ancient gates, and I just wanna make a quick observation about this. Here's Nayuta's family house, and here's the nearest gate. You know, there's something to be said about how hard work and dedication stack up against sheer freaking luck, but how tragic is it that Nayuta's parents went on a dangerous expedition and most likely died a horrible death trying to find something that was literally on their backyard? It's probably for the best that Nayuta was so enraptured by the wonders of Lost Heaven that this implication seemed to have whizzed right past him. God damn, that would not be a fun discovery. Anyway, as far as RPGs go, it's a fair bit of an info dump, but I've seen worse, and this one sprinkles in just enough Lovecraftian elements to keep me interested. It still suffers from Falcom's constant flirting with darker themes and inability to follow through with them most of the time, which is a bit of a wasted opportunity, but what flirting there is to be had, and the Lovecraftian undertones that permeate Terra, light as they may be, make for an interesting combination that, while not outright unique or horrifying, remind me a lot of the Dreamland, my favorite part of the mythos, only instead of Land of Arthur we get Nayuta's endless optimism and determination. While I love the world and the main characters, I unfortunately cannot say the same about most of the side characters. The denizens of Remnant Isle are, for the most part, one-note, shallow stereotypes who have little to no bearing to the main story. Even those closest to the main cast, like Nayuta's sister Erta and his childhood friend Lyra, do very little beyond teaching him the ultimate mechanics and telling him to combat safe. Some of their storylines are slightly expanded on New Game Plus, which features a number of extra characters and quests, but that leads us to another issue. The fact that part of the side stories are locked behind a second playthrough for no apparent reason. Of course, padding out a shorter RPG with the expectation that you play through the story multiple times to find out new bits of information that were previously unavailable is nothing new for Nihon Falcom. They thankfully eased off of that habit in more recent years, but they often did that in the early 2000s, and Nayuta is no exception. But contrary to, for example, Ys Origin, which gave us 3 vastly different characters to play as and expected you to go through the story with each of them to see everything through their individual points of view, making for a more varied and engaging experience, Legend of Nayuta's New Game Plus features the exact same protagonists, with the exact same gameplay and exact same story, except there's a few extra side characters and side quests with absolutely no impact to the main plot. Because of that, these quests feel like they were arbitrarily locked away exclusively for the purpose of persuading players to go through the entire game again, rather than due to any benefit it might bring to the experience as a whole. And let me tell you, unless you really enjoy Nayuta's gameplay, it's just not worth it. Hell, even if you do, you might be better served by playing through the time attack mode instead, since the boss fights are by far the best part of the action. And that brings us smoothly into the gameplay section of the review. The Legend of Nayuta is an isometric action RPG with a decent bit of platforming. Contrary to most other Nihon Falcom games, it's divided into clearly delimited stages rather than one big connected world. This level-based structure causes a lot of people to compare it to the more obscure Zwei series, released in 2001 and 2008, but I can't really attest to that since, like most other people, I haven't played Zwei either. Instead, I'd like to compare Nayuta to Ys Origin, my favorite out of the Ys series. In Ys Origin terms, The Legend of Nayuta plays a bit like you'd expect if you mashed Unica and Hugo together. Like Unica, Nayuta is incapable of using magic, but he is very agile and handy with swords, both one-handed and two-handed. The fairy Noi accompanies Nayuta throughout most of the game, lending him her magical powers, plus a bunch of movement and support abilities that you unlock as you progress. This creates an interesting dynamic both in terms of story and gameplay. Magic is very much a Terran thing, only accessible to Nayuta through Noi's operation, and whenever she's unavailable for whatever reason, you lose access to her powers, which represent a sizable portion of her toolbox. These noiseless sections can be truly challenging, especially in the late game as you incorporate more and more of her magic into your gameplay style. The moment-to-moment gameplay is very straightforward. Players are tasked with platforming through each stage, fighting off monsters, and occasionally solving puzzles or finding treasure. Levels are clearly designed with handheld players in mind, as they are small, bite-sized, and can often be completed in about 3 to 5 minutes each. They're nothing to write home about, but not bad either. Controls are responsive and intuitive, which is more than enough, and slashing enemies throughout each stage is a decent bit of mindless fun. I finished my first playthrough on the hard difficulty, by the way, and for the most part didn't feel like the stages themselves were very challenging, but the bosses certainly were. Interestingly, the difficulty affects the platforming gameplay just as much as the combat, which I find to be remarkably forward-looking for a 2012 game. One aspect that felt underdeveloped in this game was the monster design. They look fine, but there are too few of them for a game this size, and they are endlessly recycled into more powerful, slightly different looking versions as you go from continent to continent. Boss design, on the other hand, is much better. Each boss fight has its own set of unique gimmicks, which act as puzzles to be solved, and the process of figuring them out is always fun. Once you finish a level, you are rated between 1 and 3 stars, but most stages are set up in such a way that it is impossible to get all 3 in your first try, forcing you to replay through them for the last star. Ignoring them isn't really an option either, as for every 6 stars you receive, you can go back to Nayuta and Signa's Master Orbus to unlock new skills and items, some of which are vitally important. Much of the progression feels very repetitive. Terra has 4 continents, each containing 3 stages that have to be beaten in order to reach that continent's tower, which consists of a much longer 2-part stage. When you get to the top, you unlock a boss stage where you fight that continent's boss and take their master gear. Then you unlock a new continent and do it all over again. Recovering a master gear unlocks Legend of Nayuta's biggest gameplay gimmick: the ability to change the seasons on that continent, revealing that those 3 stages are actually 12, 3 for each season. At first, I thought that was a pretty good idea, as each season can dramatically change the look and feel of the stages, until I realized 2 of these seasons are, once again, locked away behind New Game Plus. And that's the gist of my experience with this game. If there's one word to define The Legend of Nayuta, it's repetition. You have to repeat levels to get all 3 stars, repeat the levels again to find sidequest related interaction spots that were unavailable back when you first went through it, and repeat the entire game all over again to get the last few bits of story and gameplay that have been arbitrarily locked away behind New Game Plus. As if someone at Falcom suddenly decided the game needed to be twice as long but didn't have the time or budget to actually fill it out, and it works to the game's detriment, turning what would have been a pretty good 20-hour game into a tiresome 50-hour grind. The Legend of Nayuta is available for $40 on Steam, but regularly goes on sale for $20. It's not an easy recommendation even on sale, but if you are already a Nihon Falcom fan and want to see what kind of insanity they would get up to when freed from the East and Trails mines, by all means go ahead, and I don't think you'll regret it. If you aren't, well, maybe go buy East Orange instead, as it is fairly similar in terms of gameplay, but much cheaper and better in almost every way. Then, once you finally become a fan, maybe circle back and try this one out. Once again, thanks for watching this video. I hope it was useful to you in some way, and of course, feedback is always welcome. See you later, bye!